Hello, and welcome to a special Games That Weren't video feature, where we'll be looking at the origins of Archer Maclean's Dropzone, featuring details and materials never seen before until now. Dropzone is of course one of the most memorable games on the Atari platform, converted to the Commodore 64 and many other platforms over the years. It was created by the genius that is the late Archer Maclean in 1984, who sadly passed away in late 2022. With the game, Archer created an impressively smooth title that was heavily inspired by both Defender and Stargate from the arcades. However, the origins are far more complex than originally first thought, and it wasn't just born from the inspiration of both those arcade titles. In August 2023, Chris Wilkins of Fusion Retro Books entrusted Games That Weren't with the task of preserving all of Archer's development discs. Whilst doing so, a series of significant discoveries were made which tells us the story of how we ended up with this amazing Dropzone game. Firstly, on a digital CV stored on one of his Atari discs, Archer reveals that he first bought his Atari 800 and disk drive way back in September 1981 and began getting to grips with the machine quickly, producing a series of experiments in the basic language. In some cases, he was trying to replicate elements of his favourite arcade machines at the time, and it wasn't long until he moved over to machine language where things really began to take off. At the time, Arch was a huge fan of Williams' Defender and carried out a number of experiments and test programs in BASIC to see how some of those key elements from the game could work and fit together on the Atari 800 before delving further and producing something more significant. Eventually, that early groundwork would evolve into an ambitious development to convert the entire game to the Atari 800. First of all, we're going to take a look at some of those early basic experiments which led to that early prototype. First up, we have an experiment which Archer did to kind of show the effect of when a bullet hits an object. Very simple with a very basic early ship which Archer would use for his game. Next up, just an experiment where he's playing around with the sound effects, trying to get the explosion sound going. Then a series of experiments where Archer tried to attempt different shot effects from the actual ship. Here we can see a different ship which is just being used for the experiment. This is followed by a slightly different version with a different ship and a colourful effect applied to the actual laser. Then Archer had a play with the score panel, just seeing how potentially the score could look. Then had a go at attempting to create some of the objects that are seen within the game. This was followed by a more complex sound demo where Archer really started to having a look at the sound effects that would make up the game overall, which are a very important element of the game and which most people can remember as well. And Archer, I think, did a pretty decent job of getting something quite close to the arcade here, and all just with the basic pokey sound chip. Then we have another explosion sound. Followed then by a test explosion of when the ship explodes. Here it's quite slow because this has been written in BASIC, but in a moment we'll speed it up just to kind of show a little bit quicker of how it would have animated in machine language. Archer then had a play with the Swarm enemy, just to kind of show how that would work, or how it could work. And there were 2 versions of this on the disc overall, just with very slight variations. Things then started to ramp up a little, where Archer would have a look at the different display modes on the Atari just to try and play and see how the game could look, laying out characters on the screen. Here we can just see a very simple idea with a very basic score panel, some objects on the screen, and an animating effect with some of the characters going up. This is then followed by another example where we're seeing flashing items on the screen, the basic score panel and flashing score. The 2 demos after this are a little bit corrupted, possibly because there's a character set missing. It might need more examination, but these give you the basic idea of what Archer was trying to do and how things were trying to look. After the experiments, Archer felt confident that he could convert Defender and spent 2 months writing a prototype to show Atari, with the intention to make something as close as possible to the arcade. We will now take a look at 4 prototypes that showcase his progress. The first prototype demonstrates very early on an impressively fast and smooth scroll system, with a scanner display at the top and some basic enemy spawning, but not much else at this stage. Even so, at this very early stage, you can see quite clearly that Archer had something very promising on his hands. The second prototype, we see a ship that looks far more like the Defender ship that we all know, but we also now get some more basic spawning of enemies on the screen, with some interactivity where we can shoot enemies and score points. But still, there's a lot more to go. And with the next prototype, things would really begin to ramp up quite significantly. With the third prototype, a heck of a lot more enemies were then chucked into the game. As you can see, the scanner is extremely busy. There's also men that you can shoot and pick up at the bottom of the screen, and it's now starting to feel a heck of a lot more like Defender. It's extremely impressive, and even at this stage, had this been shown to Atari, then I'm sure that this would have got their attention. But Archer was a perfectionist, and there was one more prototype round that he wanted to go through, which would be the prototype he would eventually show to Atari. It took a lot of determination and hard work, but Archer didn't disappoint and managed to get an arcade-accurate representation of the game in a prototype form, which he would take and demonstrate at the PCW 1982 show. This is a version that was shown to Atari. According to Archer's CV, the prototype received great interest, though the Atari manager at the time told Archer to drop the development as a cartridge version was already underway in the US and getting released later that year. As a result, development ceased, with Archer focusing instead on his academic studies for his 3rd and final year of his degree. As you can see, it was an impressive showcase and a lot better than the official conversion that took place. It makes you wonder how things could have been had Archer been given the gig, but this was certainly not the end of things. After completing his degree around May 1983, Archer discovered the new sequel to Defender called Stargate. It prompted Archer to dust down the code he had produced for Defender and considerably improve it and tidy it up into a more Stargate shape and form. He first of all added an impressive logo with a colour fade effect to add extra polish, which you can see here. Looks kind of familiar as well, doesn't it, when you see the colour fade in a moment. This was sent to Steve Gerber of Atari UK, according to Archer's CV. The half-finished prototype seriously impressed him, and it was enough to have it sent out to California in September of 1983 to be put in possible contention as the official Stargate cartridge release for the Atari platform. As you can see, it's not hugely different to the Defender prototype. There are a number of improvements, and a demonstration of some of the key concepts that you can see there on the map. In the meantime, Archer showcased this Stargate prototype at the PCW 1983 show on the Atari stand in October of that year. This would cause Atari US's Chris Horseman to ask for Archer's CV to be sent to him, with a view for possible employment over in the US. Unfortunately for Archer, neither Stargate or himself would get picked up by Atari, and Chris Horseman would shortly cease working for Atari. It may have been related to the gaming crash of that time, or because once again, Atari already had someone working on a conversion. The same developer who did the official Defender game was the person who did that Stargate conversion, but even their conversion was never released as well. Archer would go on to do a bit of freelance programming, before then resurrecting the idea of a Defender Stargate game, but with his own design and twist. In 1984, Dropzone was born out of the ashes of both those abandoned conversions, and building on what had been learnt from both of those. Overall, the Defender and Stargate conversion attempts are hugely significant in historical set of findings, which show part of the seed that was planted and which would grow into Dropzone just a year later. Little did we know until now that Archer could have almost done the official Defender and Stargate conversions for Atari, which is an amazing thing to learn. Had this happened, Dropzone may never have even existed in the first place. Overall, you can find the basic code snippets and the prototypes on the Games That Weren't website after Chris Wilkins kindly gave permission for us to upload them. You can find the links in the video description, where you can also read more details and see galleries showing the materials that we have found. We hope you enjoyed the video and thank you for watching. Much of the work wouldn't have been possible thanks to the following people. To Chris Wilkins of Fusion Retro Books for the loan of Archer's discs to preserve and for the permission to add executables to the site. To Alan Hammerton for hardware help and providing some equipment. To Matt Allen for the flippy PC drive loan due to some technical issues with my own drive, which we used to kind of back up the discs. To Ashley Hogg for assistance in looking at one of the prototypes and helping to try and get working. And then finally to Bertrand from Atari Mania for his guidance and help with Atari tools and various formats as we were trying to figure out what was what. Thank you everyone, and we'll see you in the next video.